Hello there, this is Dr. Jason Munsell. It is Thursday, the 26th of January, in the year of our Lord 2017, as if my watch actually says that, about 1:14 p.m. I wanted to take a little bit of a detour here and talk a little bit about some general ideas about CMC in relationship to FTF. Hopefully you get all the lingo by now. Before I move into some of the rest of Chapter 2. And the stuff that I'm going to offer you now is not from our textbook, which really doesn't matter because I just went over the bookstore, and of course our textbook is still not in, so you just are going to have to deal with my silly banterings here on online in our virtual world. This is CMC right here. But it comes from this book, Computer Mediated Communication, by Social Interaction in the Internet, by Thurlow, Lingle, and Tomic. And if you recall, a lot of the postmodernist stuff that I talked about and the pillars of intellectual life that I discussed previously comes from this book as well. And I also put up an additional PowerPoint that just basically says extra fun stuff, so you can follow along that way. And the PowerPoint for Chapter 2 is up now. I neglected to put it up yesterday, but I put it up this morning, so you can follow along as you watch the first half of the Chapter 2 stuff. But this stuff is I think it is important, and our textbook doesn't really talk about some of these ideas that I'm about to talk about. So you might want to take extra special, careful notes here, so you learn all this stuff. Of course, a lot of this stuff is on the PowerPoint slides as well. But, so, there has been, and I'm doing this in part because I do think Chapter 2 and the communication privacy management theory is pretty complicated, has a lot of different facets to it. It's very sciencey. So maybe backing up and offering some basic ideas, theories, models about computer-mediated communication might be helpful as we move to the complexities of issues of privacy and privacy management and information flow and all that type of stuff as I move back into the rest of Chapter 2. But basically, there is this idea out there, and you know it. People talk about it, and research has researched this, that CMC ain't all that good. A lot of folks say there's this issue of asociality. Asociality. It's not social. Why? Because there's no bodies. Not really. Maybe. I don't know. We always also at the same time need to think about not getting to either or thinking, but some people do have either or thinking. So there are some essential questions. A lot of people charge that CMC is cold, impoverished. It's not good, effective communication. So is it? Is it always cold and impoverished? I don't know. I don't think so, but some people do. Are folks, when they get online, are they always uninhibited and aggressive and just go, defriend, defriend? I don't know. So is it always really, some people, yeah, but is it always that way? I don't think so. Some people do. And at the end of the day, is CMC really different from face-to-face? Yes, of course it is. It's completely different. I don't know. I don't really think so. But a lot of people do. So we have to sort of think about the relationship, constantly need to think about the relationship between CMC and FTF. And if I've always argued, or already have argued, I always argue that all blurs in, so we cannot really, we don't know the difference, or we can't, it's hard to take them apart, because it's, as we are living our face-to-face lives, oftentimes we talk about CMC. Hey, you did that, and I saw that you posted this on Facebook, blah, blah, blah. Or oftentimes when we're thinking about doing something, or we're doing something CMC or face-to-face, see, I'm getting confused. It's like, oh, I want to put that on Facebook, or I want to tweet that. But, so there is this idea, though, out there that CMC ain't no good, or ain't as good as face-to-face. And the next slide here, we get into what a lot of people call the deficit approaches. That is, CMC is deficient in certain ways, and therefore not, nor could it be, I guess, as good or effective as face-to-face communication. Which again, I disagree with. It just depends on the context. But there are three models at the get-go here that I want you to understand, although there's more models than that. There's something called the social presence model. There's something called the the cluelessness model. I always want to say cluelessness model, but it's cluelessness model. And then the media richness, rich is so very, very rich. The media richness model. And in a nutshell, I mean, it's as they sound. So the social presence model sort of says that CMC might be deficient in some ways because people ain't there. It's not really, going to the dining hall over there. People are there. You can touch people. You can grab some delightful chicken nuggets off of their plates and go, that's good chicken. You can't grab chicken on the internet. I learned that because I was like, chicken, I can't get it. But they do make stuff look really, really tasty on the internet. More than I'll get to that. So there's a sense that because people are really not there, it's not nearly as effective or good as, or whatever, face-to-face. Cluelessness model. What do we do, or what do we have when we are communicating face-to-face? We have lots of nonverbal cues that help us make meaning out of the verbal communication. We have facial expressions, we have gestures, we have eye contact, we do things with our body, all that type of stuff, kinesics. Very oftentimes in CMC, we don't have those cues because we're not there. So oftentimes you'll send somebody an email or text somebody, and because those cues are not there, sometimes it's difficult to understand, okay, what are you really trying to say here? And sometimes people do miscommunicate. Oh, I meant that as a joke. Oh, well, I didn't take it as a joke. I thought you were, well, I'm going to unfriend you. Screw you. Blah! And then we have the media richness model, and that is this idea that we always seek to have the richest sort of sensual experience. And when I say sensual, I mean with our senses. We want to smell things, we want to taste things, we want to feel things, we want to hear things, we want to see things. You cannot taste stuff on the internet. You cannot smell stuff on the internet, which is really a good thing, perhaps most of the time. But very often we try to compensate for that through other things. But in any case, so there are these ideas, these models that sort of say that face-to-face and I'm here, you're here is better. Again, I don't think that is different, but some people say that. So, all that sort of stuff rests on sort of two big ideas. This is the next slide. And I've already said this, so this would be a little bit redundant, but those models rest on this idea that all the visual and social cues are needed for any sort of sociability. So if those are gone, we don't have social. Which, okay, yeah. So, but if people ain't there, Does that automatically mean it's not social? Yes, social means people, but so some people say that, yeah. Oh, and then a lot of folks say that CMC was always meant to be much more task-oriented and relational-oriented. And if you've ever taken interpersonal communication, you might realize there's a difference between so-called task communication and relational communication. And task, like, okay, let's do this. Relational is, yes, let's do this. I like you, and I like that you're doing this with me. Yeah. So they say that CMC is necessarily more task-oriented, and therefore it's hard to convey relational messages. I like you, you like me, through CMC. But again, yeah, I don't always agree with that type of stuff. The next slide talks about, I say see box here, you won't see the box, but there's another model that is very similar to everything that I've already talked about called the Social Information Processing Model, or SIP. SIP. It's not really a SIP. It's a Diet Coke. I just took a social information processing model out of that thing. So basically, it's trying to understand the interpersonal dynamics, the relational dynamics of CMC. And so there is this idea about communication imperative. I don't know if you ever heard of that before, but it's you probably have. But it's an important concept, and basically, it says that we will always try to create or compensate for problems in our interactions with one another. So, for instance, if certain technologies do not allow us to do certain things, to convey certain messages, we will find a way to do it. So, for instance, I'm thinking about some of the initial sort of, back in the day, before we had emojis and all that type of stuff, people just used the keyboard. I still use the keyboard to make little symbols to try to insert some relational meaning in their little smiley face or a wink or something like that. It's amazing what people can do with these little things. But then, of course, we have all these, we have crafted all these emojis and all these text symbols and everything like that to compensate for the fact, in part, that we are not there physically, corporeally, but we manage that in lots of different ways with different visuals, all sorts of different things that we do now. FaceTime, yeah, Skype, all of it. So we have this imperative to make everything as rich as it possibly can be.